Hi everyone and welcome. As part of our BWD interview series, today I'm joined by Steve Butler, CEO of Punter, Southall, Aspire. Hi Steve.
Hi, nice to see you.
Steve not only runs a successful advice business, but he's also an author and aficionado on diversity in the workplace. And his book, Manage the Gap, is effectively a management handbook on the challenges and solutions to getting the most out of intergenerational teams. Would that be fair to say, Steve?
It's kind of my journey over the last few years and some of the challenges I've faced, and ways that kind of I've attempted to address some of the issues.
Great. Steve, before we get into talking about the book, could you just give us a brief introduction to yourself and how you ended up running Punter, Southall, Aspire? And I suppose, going way back, did you choose financial services or did it choose you?
I didn't choose it. I was as a teenager, I kind of enjoyed rock climbing, mountaineering, just generally being outside, which was obviously great for my health, but not so good for my A-level results. So I had some very dismal A-level results, and my father said to me, well, you're not going to university just to do the same thing. It's out to work for you, my lad. So the first job that kind of appealed to me was a trainee life inspector,
right,
for equity and law, based out of their Southampton branch office. So I joined that business at the age of 18, not knowing what a life insurance company was, or a pension, or an actuary, or any such complicated issues, and and that's where I started.
with naive enthusiasm.
Yes, well, there was lots of cream cakes and lots of beers after work. So they gave me a company car, so it meant
Oh wow!
I could drive to the mountains
I was
at the
going to say you could
weekend.
get to the rock climbing a lot easier. So your book, Manage the Gap. I know you've written more books, and this was the latest one in the series. It's a fascinating read. I did really enjoy reading it, and I think probably because I'm a business owner myself, we have a small business, and clearly we have to manage our team of people as effectively as we can. But of course, diversity is such a hot topic at the moment. But your interest in that clearly goes back longer than the recent trend. So I'm just interested to know where has your interest in the subject come from?
I think probably the same as yourself. As a business owner, you spend a disproportionate amount of time managing conflict and kind of managing issues that shouldn't really exist.
Yeah,
And it was kind of the realization that I should be spending my time on nice strategic thinking, and all the important thing that I should be doing was being prevented because I was constantly involved in kind of personnel issues.
yeah,
And on reflecting on that, one of the things which obviously this book was about was around a different generation I saw entering the workplace, very different from myself. I entered the workplace when equity and law was a very bureaucratic structure, and I kept quiet and did what my boss told me. And if I did that for long enough, then I got promoted up to the next step in the ladder, and it was all very clear and well defined. And there was a very clear set of behaviours that I knew that I had to conform with in order to progress through the organisation. I now find people joining the organisation with a very different set of values. They want to be heard. They want to be part of the conversation. They want to challenge me. They want to challenge their colleagues. They're not happy with working 9 to 5 in the office 5 days a week. They want flexibility. They want to know what the values of the company are and whether our values match theirs. And these are all things that were not present when I joined the workplace. And as you can imagine, for a number of my colleagues, they found this new generation joining the workplace quite confrontational and
yeah.
kind of challenging. So the starting point for all of this was, well, how do I address some of these challenges and get these different generations in the workplace working together without conflict, and also keep the staff, because I had an exit interview with someone a few years ago and said, well, why are you going? And it's like, well, because on one side of the business, I can see someone working flexibly, but my boss doesn't let me do that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to a business where I believe I can work flexibly.
Yeah.
And therefore getting all my bosses, getting all the kind of managing directors and principals, etc., aligned on these issues is important.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned something there actually, and there's some great anecdotes in the book, and I think it really brings the content to life because I can relate to it, the theory that's being discussed. And I think you describe it right at the start as your light bulb moment. There's two people that you work with, and as you know, I've met John. So I did have a wry smile on my face when I was reading it, but could you just explain how that sort of dynamic worked?
So John is the same age as me. We both sort of joined the industry at similar times, and we worked together in our early career for Royal Life International, both covering different segments of the world as business development roles, and we built a very close relationship and close bond because of that experience that we had together. When I started to build the Punter Aspire business, I thought John is someone I've got to have in the business. I trust him. He's great at what he does, and he's evolved into what I think is kind of one of the best marketeers in financial services at the moment.
Yeah.
He's not held back by the past and the way things have been done in the past. So he's a key member of my team. I in keeping with my desire to kind of keep the business fresh and young, I was approached by a young lady who was a employee communications specialist, and she sent me her CV, and it was the most colourful, best CV I've ever seen in my life. It was lots of coloured blocks. It told me how she was going to add value to my business, how I needed to evolve my business, and she was the right person to do it. So I had to interview her. I interviewed her, and she was the same thing. It was the same thing. I had a whole presentation of how she was going to transform the business. I hired her. I didn't have a job for her, but I hired her on the basis that she could make a difference, and she has. She's been with us three years, and she's been transformational. So there was a point that I thought, actually, I've got to get these two people in the room together on a project, because it would be brilliant what they produced.
Yeah.
But what actually happened was massive conflict, because Joanna had a very strong set of views, wanted to be heard, perhaps didn't respect the kind of hierarchy of age, didn't respect John's experience and what he brought to the business, and it resulted in just conflict and the whole project kind of crumbling around them, and took some very skillful management and maneuvering to kind of get the project back on track, and the two of them working well together. And I realized that the heart of this was just generational differences and the different perspectives they had on it.
Because you talk about the 5 different generations, and how they're clearly different and need to be treated differently. As an owner of a recruitment business, I was particularly interested to read about Generation X, which is my generation, and Generation Y, the millennials, and how they interact. And I found that fascinating. But what shapes each generation?
I think ultimately it has to be the parenting. The millennials were parented by the baby boomers.
Yeah.
And the baby boomers grew up in a post-war world that was changing and kind of very, very different, and they empowered their children and they educated their children, and they told their children they could be anything they wanted to, and that's very different from their own upbringing. And hence you have a very different perspective. That the baby boomers very respectful of hierarchy, very respectful of kind of routine and experience. They've tried things out, and they've found out the way that it works best for them, but they're still potentially held back by the legacy of the way the businesses have always been. And they've created a generation of individuals willing to challenge and willing to question.
Yeah. And what other, just to remind people who are watching, Steve, what are the key sort of characteristics of the generation? I mean, you don't have to go through all of them, but if we're talking about...
I think if you look at the baby boomers,
Yeah.
as I say, they're like, they've grown up in a world where they've worked 9 to 5, they've respected the hierarchy of the organisation, they've always had to come to work in a shirt and tie, they've had to be very conscious about their arrival time. They've always kind of sat at their desk and kind of worked hard, and you know, that's worked for them. You then have a millennial generation that says, well, actually, why do I need to be in the office at 9 o'clock every day? Does it matter whether I work 9 to 5? Because actually I have some of my best ideas in the evening, and I'd rather kind of work and you know, work in at different times. In fact, why do I need to be in the office? I quite like working in coffee shops.
Yeah.
I like working at home. I like working in the office. And I think the millennial generation are also, because they've grown up with technology and social media, the lines between their personal life and their business life are very blurred, and they're kind of very mixed. And that kind of shows in the way that they approach things, where you've got a baby boomer generation that has kept their private life quite separate from work. They don't really talk about what goes on in their private life. And they're perhaps sometimes offended by the conversations that go on by the younger generations, because it's not the conversations that they would have.
Yeah.
So I think it's you know, it's those kind of differences that are at the heart of this.
Yeah.
And I think you've then got the next generation coming in, which are in fact, you know, myself as a Gen X, and my children are joining the workplace now, and they're an exaggerated version of the millennials, because they've had even more technology that they've grown up with, and their social and business lives are completely blended, and they can't see the separation between the two.
Yeah.
So again, they think it's perfectly acceptable to drop out of work for an hour in the middle of the day to go and do something, because they're putting the hours in later on in the day.
Yeah.
And it's those, as I say, those types of things that cause the conflict.
Because I mean, I guess I had thought about it, but it kind of brings it home when I read it, and I think it's this sort of difference between the generations and how they behave differently, is rooted in how they've been brought up. But they're not doing it to annoy the other generation. You know, that's just how the way they are, and you know, we need to be, as managers, we need to be mindful of that, and I suppose accommodate that in our management structure and our management style.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think there's the classic point about mobile phones.
Yeah.
And I guess anyone with children kind of has this feeling where you're like, well, just put your phone down and talk to me directly.
Yeah.
But I think the generation that's grown up with technology has learned efficiently to stay connected to multiple channels at the same time.
Yeah.
And having a conversation directly with someone while you're having a text chat conversation is perfectly acceptable behaviour to them, because that's what they've done at university and throughout their lives.
Yeah.
And I'm only irritated by it because, you know, I want to have a direct one-to-one conversation without that interruption, because I think it's impacting the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think as soon as you can acknowledge that actually there's different ways to approach this communication, the better. And certainly in our organisation, we've opened up many more different communication channels to allow people to collaborate in different ways, rather than in a room together, face to face, with no distractions.
Yeah.
That's not the only way to do it.
Absolutely, no. So in terms of, I mean, we couldn't have an interview with you, Steve, without sort of mentioning the current climate, the pandemic, the various lockdowns. How do you think that's affected the different generations in the workplace differently? You know, are the more tech savvy millennials, do they need less hand holding in the work from home environment, or is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the lockdown, it was fantastic to watch, because none of us had used Microsoft Teams. We all learned together.
Yeah.
So perhaps without stereotyping, my technophobe older generation were able to kind of learn together with that younger generation, and we could all laugh about, being on mute, etc., and all these kind of things together. So I think that experience allowed us to accelerate the technology learning of my older generation in a very nice collaborative way. So I think that was one positive experience.
Yeah.
There's the physical difference. Obviously, perhaps the older generations have got more infrastructure around them. They've got bigger homes, separate offices in their homes, etc. So the working from home has been easier for them. They've got families around them. I've got younger employees in the business that are in studio flats in Putney that they share with their partner who's also home working, and that's created issues for them. I think my baby boomers and Gen X are very comfortable with working on their own and just getting on with their work, whereas that younger generation want more collaboration. They want kind of more reinforcement that they're doing the right thing. So they've perhaps found a loneliness of kind of working alone without that collaboration. So we've had to put in place, depending on the team structure, more formal teams type activities to kind of make that younger generation more settled with their work and the way that they work.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I guess there's some really useful practical advice in the book of how to manage teams successfully, which clearly takes a lot of hard work, dedication, and organisation. On one hand, having that inclusive structure that you talk about, so that there's not one executive committee. We've got lots of different committees, which so people feel that they're involved in the decision-making process, and also having those regular meetings with staff so that you can really understand what drives them. I mean, that is key, but how do you strike the balance between that and just not having too many meetings for meeting's sake? And the reason I'm interested in this is because last year we moved to a much more agile working pattern and working structure. And quite recently, we've introduced a 4-day week as on a trial basis for the next 3 months, because we really wanted to put the mental health of our staff right at the heart of what we're doing. And we want to be more output based in terms of how we measure things as well. But this means that our time and the time of our staff is so much more precious, because we've got to get 5 days worth of work into 4 days essentially. So how do we make sure that we don't have too many meetings going on, because that's good for the management of the business, but is it good for the productivity of the team?
Yeah, and I think that's rethinking what you think about a meeting. I mean, historically, the meeting was 6 people in a physical room together. It was scheduled for an hour, and you took an hour regardless of kind of how much work needed to be kind of covered. And the rest of the time was filled up with talking about football or other things, dependent on the group of people that you've got. I think working in a much more agile way and a more frequent touch point way, you've got to reframe what a meeting is.
Right.
And your working day isn't 7 1-hour meetings. There's 15-minute meetings, there's half an hour meetings, there's a collective coming together just for social with no reason for it. Because the trouble is, you go to very short, productive meetings and the social's lost entirely.
Yeah.
And social's an important element of it. So you've got to look at all the elements and say, well, we can actually reframe what a meeting is, how much time it takes, what we're going to cover. If we are losing it, we've got to cover it in other ways. Yeah. And again, I think the COVID era of working on teams is actually, we've all been through a learning experience, and we've all learned a lot about how to kind of reframe meetings and lose wasted time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And what do you see are the main challenges for sort of managing your team, our team remotely? What are the key things that are causing the issues?
I think, especially now in the current lockdown 3, I feel there's a much more heightened sense of anxiety across the business, because we've got there are many more unknowns at the moment. So the biggest challenge I'm finding right now is that someone might be missed off a call or be missed off a conversation. Now, when we're all in the office together, it would have been easy because you just wander over to their desk and kind of chatted to them for a bit and something would have come up and they wouldn't have felt left out.
Yeah.
But it's without clearly thinking it through, it's very easy to kind of miss a bit of communication to a specific person. And I think because people are feeling very anxious at the moment, every little thing is amplified.
Yeah.
And they suddenly start thinking, oh, they didn't tell me that. So I wonder what the reason is. Is there a change about to happen? Am I about to lose my job?
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest challenge I have at the moment, is making everyone feel secure and comfortable that we're all doing our best, but occasionally that we're going to make mistakes and someone might be missed off a list or whatever.
Yeah, it's not perfect, is it? So is there a level of reassurance from you as the CEO? I mean, how often would you just ring someone from the team and just have a chat with them, just to kind of that arm around the shoulder? Do you have time to do that kind of thing?
I think that's, for me as CEO right now, that's a large chunk of my week is doing that work. And the other positive thing out of COVID actually it's helped us settle on the right level of communication. So over the last few years, whenever we did staff surveys, I always had this constant kind of feedback that there wasn't enough communication happening to the business. And I tried all sorts of things, company newsletters, filming a quarterly presentation and kind of sending that out, traveling around the country, team meetings, every way possible to maximize the communication. And I think what people were craving for was actually they wanted more honest communication.
Okay.
It wasn't that I wasn't telling them everything, but they kind of wanted to see my vulnerabilities. They wanted to kind of hear what the challenges were. And I think early COVID, we introduced a kind of monthly Teams call for the whole business.
Yeah.
And I decided to kind of not prepare for it and let it be very off the cuff and open and honest. And the feedback about that was incredible. Everyone said, that's great. We're seeing the real Steve Butler now. We know what troubles him. We know what's keeping him awake at night. He's shared it with us. He's told us he's got a solution, so it's okay. But the fact that I'd taken them through my journey around some of these things was the important factor. And it took COVID to kind of make that happen.
Right. Is this when you talk about sort of signing in and giving yourself a score? Is that the same thing, or is that something slightly
the signing in is more to do in project meetings. I think when you have a project group together, you have an agenda and you drive straight into the business stuff.
Yeah.
But everyone comes to a meeting with their own agenda, with the own things that have happened in their personal life and their own set of characteristics. And often your introvert individual doesn't say much.
Yeah.
And your alpha male dominates. So in order to kind of help manage that, I introduced a sign-in process at the beginning of a project meeting where we all, it takes us 10 minutes at the start, but we all share something personal that's going on in our life at the moment and kind of how we're feeling at that moment in time. So if there is something going on in someone's life, so for example, their mother's just been taken into hospital with COVID, everyone in the meeting knows that person's feeling, vulnerable because of that point.
Yeah.
It gives a platform for my introverts to kind of share some of their stuff without feeling they're pushing things onto people. And I think it just makes the relationship in the room for that hour much more personal because we've kind of put it on a personal setting at outset and makes it more inclusive.
And a greater level of understanding around the room as well, so that if someone is having a rough time of it, then there's compensations to be made for that. And how did the different generations approach just that exercise? I suspect that the baby boomers would be a bit more closed,
they hated it. I mean, the first time I did it with one of my baby boomers, he stood up at the flip chart and faced the flip chart and spoke at the flip chart and was only up on his feet for 30 seconds. Whereas perhaps my younger generation were on their feet for kind of 3 or 4 minutes and you
showing
couldn't
photographs on phones and stuff.
So but with perseverance, it's now become a regular thing that we do and everyone's got comfortable with it. And I think a good example is one of my older team members. His mother was ill, and she lived in Liverpool. And on a Friday afternoon, he was having to shoot off early to go to Liverpool to kind of sort out her care home and all this type of stuff. A younger member of his team felt very unjustly that they'd asked for some flexibility and he'd said no, and then they saw him disappear off on Friday afternoon, but he never explained to them why.
Yeah.
So this came up in the meeting and they went, oh, that's where you were going on Friday afternoon. I get it now. I have absolute sympathies. There's no problem at all. But, you know, I wanted to go to my toddler's, you know, school show or whatever. You weren't comfortable with me doing that. So, you know, so it just opened up the dialogue. And the older guy understood that, you know, if he had flexibility, which he was taking because he was senior, he had to offer the same level of flexibility to his team. And the younger team member, you know, appreciated that just because you're this senior manager, that you do actually have a personal life and issues that you have to deal with as well.
Yeah. So that openness, that, you know, fostering that openness is a good thing in that instance. Just moving on then, Steve. So you talk in the book as well, and I'm trying to pick out just some of the things that resonated with me from the book, how different generations regard money and savings. And as I say, the one thing that resonated with me was that the younger generation are less likely to save, but they would spend money on things that they felt improved their lives. And the over 45s, which is kind of where I am, are more likely to spend on a luxury for somebody else, which really resonated with me, because that's kind of how my mind works. I'd you know, spend stuff on my wife or my kids, but I'd be less inclined to do it for myself. Why do you think that is?
I think the baby boomers have taught that millennial generation that you know, it's about experience. You know, you're only on this planet for so long, and it's all about experience. So, you know, they've grown up believing that they absolutely must have that weekend away in Berlin because it's important for their experience, and they are going to spend money on that. They live in a much less secure world. You know, I think the baby boomers grew up in a world where you had job security and you kind of knew where you were at. So therefore, for them, they could plan their finances and kind of organize it as they saw fit. I think for a younger generation, where you've got the gig economy, much more, you know, less job security, there's much more of a desire to kind of live in the moment, because you really can't plan because you don't know what the future holds.
Right.
So I think, again, that's a factor. So therefore, if you're managing your business, spending time with your younger generation, talking to them about the value of their pension and engaging them with their pension, so that they feel that this is just as an important thing in their life as their rent or their going to Berlin weekend, is really important. And you need to spend money as an employer on engaging that younger generation around their pension.
That segues lovely actually into my next question, and it is around pensions, and clearly this is what your business is all about, so you know about it. But in the UK, I guess there is a problem in that fewer people are saving for retirement, or not as much as they probably should be. Is the problem that we have in this country that there just isn't enough good financial planning advice available for everybody at every level? And is it down to us as employers to bridge that gap, or is it down to the government, or is it down to individuals to sort that out for themselves?
I think the employers have always bridged the gap. It's just in the past they bridged it with a DB pension scheme, which didn't involve any communication. You just worked, and at the end of the day, you got a fantastic pension. But the employer provided it. We're now in a situation where the employer can't afford it. So therefore, it's been replaced with a DC pension. So the responsibility with a DC pension is on the employer, is to make sure their employees value it and contribute to it. Now, my daughter recently started work, and she's joined a fintech in the city,
Yeah.
and she's in a pension where she puts in 6% and the employer puts in 6%.
Yeah.
And she's on a great starting salary as a graduate. So for her to work for the next 40 or 50 years, making a 12% contribution, it's going to be adequate.
It's going to be all right
for her for all the time. The challenge we have is perhaps our generation, where we don't have any DB, but we haven't been saving into DC at that level for our entire lives. So we've really got a gap to fill in the age range of 45 to 65. Otherwise, it's going to look a bit grim in retirement.
And I guess so this comes back to what you said. It's about the communication of that piece. And actually there's I love the mushroom analogy in the book. Can you just briefly explain what the mushroom analogy is that you mentioned in your book? The growing mushrooms.
What about? I can't remember now. Sorry.
So it's
a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So when we're growing mushrooms, we keep people in the dark, but actually it's built on the BS that you feed the mushroom on. So.
Yeah, I mean, as an employer, you have to take responsibility for some of this stuff, and it's not about keeping them in the dark. It's about kind of providing all the education and support that people need to get to the right journey. And I think it's easy for an employer to say, actually, this employee is only going to be with me for 5 or 6 years, so why do I care about whether they have enough money at the point that they retire, because they only work for me for a period of time. But you have to look at your workforce in its entirety. It might be only one individual with you for a period of time, but in its entirety, you are taking people from university all the way through to their ultimate retirement. You've got to provide the right support for each stage of that journey.
I guess that therein lies the issue, doesn't it? Because with the DB pension, that was based on a workforce that basically started with a company and worked their way up, and in a lot of instances stayed with that same company for their whole career. So you were being looked after because you stayed with that company, and the reward for that was a really nice pension that looked after you into your old age. Whereas now things are so much different, and the job market is so much more transient, isn't it?
There's benefits for the employer. We've got a much more agile workforce. As the economy changes, we can reshape our workforce. As technology changes, we can reshape our workforce. I think if you look back to that, previous economy, you had these employees. It's almost like the civil service. You've got these employees, and you've got them for life, and you've got to kind of shape your organisation around what you've got. Whereas I think now we can shape our organisations around the requirements of the economy at the time. So there's benefits for the employer. So I think it's a two-way street. That's the other thing. So yes, the responsibility and risk for saving for your pension is squarely with the employee now. But that doesn't mean the employer has no responsibility.
So this book was very much about intergenerational teams and diversity. You said that you're working on a new project. So what does that new project look like, Steve? What are you going to cover in that?
So what I found is, I started off looking at the intergenerational issues, and then you realise actually it's more than just intergenerational issues. I've got gender issues here. I've got race issues here. I've got neurodiversity issues here. The issue is actually about creating an inclusive culture that works for everyone. It's not about any specific diversity issue. And as a society and an industry, we've got lots of diversity issues, but right at the heart is about creating an inclusive culture. Because if you create an inclusive culture, you'll attract the right people regardless of their perspective. And the more diverse group of people you work with, the better the outcome is going to be of whatever your product development is or your client proposition is, etc. Because you haven't got that groupthink that perhaps existed in the past, where you just had a business run by a group of 60-year-old white males. So it's really about, and it's only a small step away from what I've been talking about, the intergenerational stuff. Because we spoke about the sign-in process. when we have our meetings, and I spoke about that from being an intergenerational perspective, but it also works well from all the other diversity perspectives,
Yeah.
to get my men to understand what it's like to, to return to work after a career break is important, to get, to get people to understand that have had a different educational background and what they bring to the business is important. So my current book is about creating an inclusive culture, and it kind of looks at all aspects of diversity in that kind of ambition to create the inclusive culture.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to reading that. So just a couple of questions to close with, Steve. So a little bit more lighthearted. So what really grates you about the financial services industry?
It's been really slow to change. I joined the industry in '88, so that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the industry is still very similar. It's still a cottage industry in lots of ways. Whereas other industries have evolved and commercialized the process and implemented technology, financial services is still lots of small businesses across the UK running as cottage industries.
Yeah.
Whereas my ambition with Southall Aspire is to commercialise and institutionalise the process of people saving for their retirement. And that means touching them in the workplace, it means touching them as a private client, it means touching them through technology, through Teams, through video, through face-to-face, and creating a more rounded experience for individuals.
Yeah, excellent. And in terms of the future, what gives you hope for the future?
So my children, obviously, I'm watching them join the workplace now. And as I said right at the start, I was not very focused back when I was 18. Didn't have any academic qualifications behind me, and have kind of made my way through the industry. I'm watching my children join the workplace now. Got a great education. They're motivated. They're driven. And I think they've got the passion to change the world. They care about some of the big societal issues, and they're making sure that those societal issues are being addressed in their workplace.
Yeah.
Because I think when I joined the workplace, we just tolerated a lot of stuff. We knew that a lot of the behaviours going on in the 80s was quite sexist, but we kind of let it happen. And they're joining the workplace and calling it out.
Yeah. Fair play to them. Well, listen, Steve, thanks for this. It's been really great talking to you, and I look forward to that new book that's coming out.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Steve.
The book that we haven't discussed, which is kind of the one in the middle, is about the midlife career review, which probably plays into your industry. Yeah, I mention it in a chapter of that.
Yeah.
But I actually take it out and do a whole book on it.
Do you? Right. Okay.
Because I think it really plays into the mid-career employee.
Yeah.
And what they want their future to look like. Because I think as an employer, I've got people leaving the business in their 50s because it's not where they want to be. They want to work part-time, they want more flexible working, they want to follow some of their other ambitions because they can afford to. And there's a danger that we lose too many people in their 50s because the workplace doesn't work for them anymore. So the midlife review is about having this conversation between employer and midlife employee going, well, what do you want the future to look like? I can't say that I can fix it for you, but let's have the conversation. I don't think that conversation happens at the moment.
I don't think it does.
Because it's not about performance objectives or appraisals. And I think you can then bed in a whole bunch of, well, we're going to give you some education around saving for retirement. We're going to give you some career education. We're going to give you some well-being education. Because again, some employees might want to work till they're 75. But they're still drinking 20 pints a week. So, they need to go through a change.
Has to give. I did find that interesting, actually, because I think that is reflected almost in the way that financial planning advice is given now. And whenever you speak to a financial planner, it's all about the cash flow modeling, isn't it? And it's all about this whole lifestyle. And it's not just about saving some money in an ISA or your pension and are you going to be okay when you're older, but it's what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? What are your ambitions for yourself and your family? So the financial advice, I think, is starting to filter down.